Good evening, community. Good evening to you who are listening to us. And let me ask you something. Do you believe in ghosts? I mean, do you believe they are possible? Do you believe in the possibility that something like that can be real? I mean, do you believe in them? In the visions that may be among us? That may be windows to other times? Echoes of the dead? Or representations of our memories? What do you think they are? Hopefully this episode, the stories we have prepared, will help us clarify some of those ideas. Ghosts can be difficult to understand or simpler than we think. Pay close attention to the following story because I really think it's very interesting and we'll discuss it later. Turn off the light, if you can, and listen. It must have been in 2006 when I first had that vision. I was 4 years old. I was on the second floor of my house heading to my room when something huge came out of there. A black figure that almost ran over me, that bumped into all the walls and hit the wall at the other end of the hallway. I screamed, and that thing turned around. Then it disappeared. The light was off. So, when my mom came running to see me, she told me it was just my imagination, that there were no ghosts in that house, that they didn't exist. She never believed it. She never believed what I told her had happened. So when 2 years later, more or less, I heard the same apparition again, she once again told me it was probably just a dream. The trauma of that vision I thought I had 2 years earlier. Although this time I didn't see it, what I heard was very clear. The bangs on the wall at the end. I guess I forgot about it until sometime in 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, when I was downstairs in the house. I once again heard someone come out of my room, hit the walls, bump into everything, and end up banging against the end of the hallway. We never had ghosts. That's true. My mom made an effort so I would always know that none of that existed, that none of that could hurt me. She did everything she could so I could live in peace, especially because our family was just the two of us, and because on many occasions I had to be alone at home for a large part of the day. It's not good for a child who has to be alone so much time, like me, to believe in ghosts and devils. I suppose it's the instinct of self-preservation, of survival. There was always a peaceful, very loving vibe in my house. I lived with my dad for a while, but I came back during the pandemic, so my mom wouldn't be alone. My dad lives with his new wife, who I get along with well, but I don't really feel like she's part of the family. It's not because of her either. I feel that way about my dad. I hadn't realized how much I missed that tranquility, the tranquility of my mother's house, waking up to the sounds of her in the kitchen, preparing breakfast at 6 a.m., coming home and hearing her watching the news in the living room, the way she arranged my things on the desk, the one we shared, so they would always be tidy, so that everything would be in its place. One Tuesday in December, last December near Christmas, the phone rang. But this time it was different. I didn't want to answer it. Something told me I shouldn't. I was in my room because my head had been hurting all day. And finally I answered. It was my dad's wife.
Are you at home? Are you alone?
I told her yes.
Is your friend across the street there? Can you please go to his house?
I looked out the window. My friend wasn't there. I told her no and asked her what was going on.
Okay. I need you to sit down. Your mom had an accident. Your dad went to the hospital. Your mom died. I'm coming to get you in half an hour. I'll come get you as soon as I can. If you want, you can go to the clinic. But maybe
I zoned out. I stopped listening to her. I didn't know anything else about my phone until a while later, when I found it broken. I guess I threw it against the wall. I felt like nothing was real. I was dizzy, about to faint. I went out to the hallway and tried to go to the stairs, but I was failing. I closed my eyes. I took heavy steps wanting to break everything. I crashed into the wall at the end of the hallway. The only thing I could do, hit it hard, break my fist to feel something other than that sadness. But someone screamed. A child screamed behind me. In the hallway, I recognized that voice. I recognized myself at that moment. I turned around and saw a figure. Mine, I suppose. A child running to go into his mother's room. I understood so much. I understood everything that had happened. And despite having a broken heart at that moment, I was glad for that child. The one I had just seen, because I knew that I, at that moment, in another time, was hugging my mom. Thank you for listening to this first story, community. And that's what I meant about how complicated ghost stories can be. Or maybe much simpler to understand than we think. Maybe there's nothing complicated about the essence of a ghost, an outburst of feelings that transcends space and time. And in that case, perhaps we've all left a ghost, somewhere, at some point, or we're going to leave one someday. Let's keep listening because there are still stories left to reflect on in this episode of Tales of the Night. Hello Uriel and to the whole community. I send you greetings from Honduras. I've been a follower of the program for a long time, and I want to share a couple of experiences with you. One happened a while ago, but the second one, which is why I'm writing to you, happened this very afternoon. I work in a city about 30 minutes from my town. Every day, I have to take a taxi to get to the terminal, and then find the bus that takes me back to my town. There I work in a not very busy neighborhood. It can get quite lonely. I remember one afternoon when I rushed out because I was about to miss the last bus back to my town, and in the distance I managed to see a taxi and I flagged it down. There was a passenger in the back, a man. But here you can share rides. The taxi driver was a lady. She stopped a little ahead of me and I checked the time on my cell phone as I walked towards the taxi. I would barely make it to the bus station on time. I prayed that the passenger was going in the same direction. I peeked in the driver's window, and she rolled it down. I asked her which direction her trip was going. She looked at me confused. At that moment, I looked towards the back seat and saw that it was empty, so a little confused, I got in. As we were on our way to the station, laughing a little, I told her nervously what I had just seen. I hesitated about whether to tell her or not, but in the end I did. You're not going to believe me, but just now when I saw you approaching, I clearly saw a man riding in the back seat. I thought you had a passenger since, when I looked again, when you stopped, I realized there was no one there. I noticed the taxi driver got scared. She turned to look at the back seat and then laughed, somewhat nervously. Then her expression changed. She looked a little sad. Maybe someone is keeping me company. I told her that maybe it was just an optical illusion, but she told me that a few days ago, an uncle of hers and his son had died in an accident. That maybe the man I saw was one of them. I remained silent, not knowing what to say, and so our trip continued. But that was just an anecdote that I remembered a while ago because of what just happened to me. Today, like every day, I had to take a taxi to get to the station. I waited a few minutes on the corner until I saw one coming in the distance, with a passenger in the front seat. I flagged it down, and as I got in the back of course, again, I was surprised to realize that the front seat was empty. I thought maybe my eyesight was failing me again, and since I wear glasses, I thought maybe it was time to get new ones. The driver asked me where I was headed, and I told him the terminal. I'm someone who doesn't find it hard to socialize. Maybe that's why I work in customer service. So I started making small talk with him, and ended up telling him. You know, I don't know if it was my imagination, if I'm already seeing things or something, but I saw someone sitting with you, in the front seat when I flagged you down. The taxi driver looked at me in the rearview mirror. He didn't laugh. He was very serious. He told me I wasn't the first person to tell him that several passengers had already commented that they saw an old man sitting next to him. He told me something more. Look, let me tell you an experience I had. One day when I got home late, I lay down for a bit and without realizing it, it became 12 o'clock. I woke up and saw the time and went out to wash the taxi. And it was really dirty. When I was soaping up the front window, suddenly I saw as if someone was sitting inside. I fell backwards and felt all the blood rush to my head. I thought I was imagining things. The next morning I told my wife what I had seen, and she told me she sometimes sees him too. When I leave or when I get home, sometimes she sees him sitting there at night when the taxi is parked. I don't know what it is, but I know it's evil. The later it gets, the worse the atmosphere starts to feel here in the taxi. So much so that I don't drive it late anymore. This is my last trip. I'm going home. I asked the driver if this taxi had belonged to someone else, and he told me he didn't know. That the car had been brought to the United States, and that they don't know anything about it before they bought it. That maybe it's something like that someone died there, and their spirit is still attached to the car, to let itself be seen from time to time. That's my story, community. Maybe not as interesting as many of the ones told here, but it still seems curious to me. I would like to know if anyone else has heard of a ghost that manifests itself, if in a car. We want to thank, well, I don't know what their name is, because they only signed their email as In Love with Murat. But we thank you, of course, for your trust, and we invite you to share your story, small or big, impactful or curious, because they all have a space in Tales of the Night, and because they are all valuable and fuel this project. We continue with more stories tonight. Don't stop listening. Don't leave until you finish the episode, because they say, if you leave before then, you will be the next protagonist. I'm going to share with you all something that started when I lost my brother. I was 10 years old. My younger brother was 8. Both of us were hurt by losing our older brother, who took care of us and always looked out for us, who protected us, and in fact, who spent the most time at home taking care of us. An accident with his friends leaving a party took him away from us. An accident that may seem absurd since the truck they were in just fell backwards from a parking lot, just one floor. All his friends came out with a few bumps and bruises, nothing more. Except him, luck, destiny, took him away from us. To try to help us cope with the loss, my parents started taking us to spend more time with the rest of the family, with cousins we hadn't had direct contact with until then. That's how we started getting close with our Christian cousins, whom my parents didn't associate with, due to that small resentment that arises when someone changes religions, even if it's for the better, even if people are happier. They were a large family, with 6 children, who always seemed to be happy. At those times, really, that love they spread, was of great help to us, so much so that my parents even let us go with them to some church services. There we found a lot of peace, but the pain didn't go away. We just gained the strength to bear it. They invited us to go camping with other kids from the church, and we were allowed to go, especially because my aunts and uncles were going to be some of the adults watching over us. They were going to stay in the cabins, a few meters away from where we, the young people, would set up our tents. For some reason, in the middle of the first day of the camp, my sister suddenly became very sad. The memory of my brother was more present than usual, as if we could feel him there, close to us. I could also feel something close by, but I hadn't wanted to mention it. I tried to distract myself, to socialize. When I noticed my sister was sad, I stayed with her, and then we went for a walk on the trail surrounding the camp. As evening fell, I told her it was time to go back, before it got dark and we got lost. And as the sun set, the cold began to set in. It was quite intense. I hugged my sister and we walked like that, trying to endure it until we got close to the tents. We started to hear them behind some trees. We were getting closer. But suddenly my sister gripped my arm tightly, making me stop. I turned to look at her. I noticed how she was looking with tears in her eyes at something among the trees, about 50 meters from us. It was a blurred figure, like a blurry photo, but the strange thing was that everything else looked perfectly normal. Only this person standing in the middle of the trees looked that blurry, so blurred that we couldn't make out their clothes, their face.
It's him, isn't it?
My sister asked me. I didn't answer her, but I also felt it was my brother. My little sister waved at the figure, and the figure waved back at us. Then it motioned to its right, indicating for us to continue, to go back to the others. And that's what we did. My sister was in good spirits. She socialized with everyone at the camp. She was happy. She was laughing. She was okay. And if she was okay, I was okay. It was a nice weekend that I didn't want to end, because I was afraid that when we went back home, everything would be the same again. That my sister would go back to being the sad little girl of the last few months. On the last night, as was customary, they started telling ghost stories at the camp. I took my sister to sleep. We didn't really like them, and when we got back home, my sister stayed well. It was me who ended up going back to sadness. My sister managed to maintain that joy that was with her since we saw my brother in the bushes. She felt calm. That's the word, maybe not happy, but calm. As if she was never alone. And I didn't really like that. She started to distance herself from me after we had gone through that grieving process together. She was distant. Then she also distanced herself from my parents. But she was calm. And that was the most important thing. A few months went by when I got up at night to go to the bathroom and I realized my parents were awake. My dad had gotten home late and my mom greeted him crying, very scared. She was telling him why. She had gone out to look for my little cat that hadn't come back all day. She looked for him in the yard when she saw something peeking in through my sister's bedroom window. The floor of my house is elevated about 1.5 meters from the yard. It's high up, and this figure was peeking through the window with ease, so it was very, very tall. My mom screamed, but this figure didn't flinch. She ran inside and locked everything, and she went to check on my sister. In her room. She found her asleep. Then she peeked out the window and there it was. That figure, in the yard, now away from the window, but still looking at her. When I heard how my mom described it, she said it looked blurry. No matter how hard she tried to focus on it, it looked blurry like a blurred photo. I knew it was my brother, what we had seen, but only then did I realize how risky it was to believe that this silhouette we were seeing was actually him. And if it was something bad. A few weeks went by and my mom saw it again from time to time. Not me. My sister was simply happy and wanted to spend most of her time in her room. I imagined it had something to do with that silhouette, so I had to talk to my mom. I told her my sister needed help. This story doesn't end with my mom looking for a witch, or a woman who knows about mystical things or something like that. Interestingly, it starts to end when she went to a child psychologist. By venting, my sister stopped spending so much time in her room. She started socializing with me again, and went back to being the girl she always was, with her virtues and flaws. The bad thing, I suppose, was that this being, this silhouette, began to torment a family a few streets away from my house. We found out because a neighbor told my mom about it, because several people had seen it, because it became a ghost on the street, a legend in the neighborhood. Much later, at a camp I went to, this time just with my cousins, at the same place where we first saw that silhouette, they once again started telling ghost stories on the last night. On that occasion, I did stay to listen. I was about to tell mine, because moreover, we saw it there, a few steps away from where we were. Something among the trees that had gone with us when one of the older boys agreed to tell the story that everyone else was asking him for. The story of the shadows that live in those woods. Shadows that approach the camp, that watch you from the night. What he wrote is exactly the same as what I saw. What I saw with my sister. What went away with us. And of course, I didn't dare to share my experience. Who was going to believe me? The only thing I can say, community, is please be careful with what you summon. What you interact with. You will never know what is seeking a way to go home with you.